by those opposite in relation to dishonesty. I believe
Hugh Doyle is being proposed as an ambassador. Ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Mr. Speaker
was correct. Well, Mr. Speaker, let's be absolutely clear.
At Night Shift Chronicles, we Americans have a problem. We are absolutely, helplessly, embarrassingly obsessed with the United Kingdom. We love the accents, all of them, every single regional variation. We could listen to someone read a grocery list in a Mancunian accent and consider it quality content. We appreciate the history, the castles, the fact that things are just old there, like genuinely old, not built in 1987 to look old, actually old. We adore the dry humor, the politeness, the way British people can absolutely destroy you with a single raised eyebrow and the word quite. And we are completely, utterly baffled by the Parliament. Because here's the thing, in that building, that magnificent Gothic Thameside building that we have definitely used as a phone wallpaper, you are not allowed to call anyone a liar. You cannot say the word banned in the one place in the entire country where accountability is supposed to happen. Instead, you have to say the honorable member was economical with the truth. You also cannot wear armor, and you cannot clap. We have so many questions. Let's get into it.
The United Kingdom's Parliament is the oldest continuously operating legislature in the Western world. It has been running in some form for 800 years. It has survived civil wars, royal executions, foreign invasions, and a direct hit from the Luftwaffe. It has not, in 800 years, updated most of its rules. What follows is the story of how an institution gets old enough that nobody can figure out how to stop it, and why, despite everything, that might be exactly the point. The year is 1215. The place is a meadow called Runnymede on the banks of the River Thames, and a group of very angry barons have had enough. King John, widely regarded as one of the worst kings England ever produced, has been taxing without consent, imprisoning without trial, and generally behaving as though the law did not apply to him, because, as far as he was concerned, it didn't. The barons disagreed, and they had an army. What followed was not quite a revolution. It was more like a very firm performance review. The barons forced King John to sign a document called Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which established for the first time that even a king was subject to the law, that certain rights could not be taken away, that the powerful could be held to account. King John signed it under duress, in a field surrounded by men who did not trust him. He was, predictably, planning to ignore it before the ink was dry. But the idea had been written down, and written down ideas have a way of outlasting the people who resented them. 50 years later, a rebel nobleman named Simon de Montfort did something that would change the architecture of power forever. In 1265, he summoned a parliament, from the French word parlement, meaning simply a conversation, that included not just nobles and bishops, but knights from the counties and representatives from the towns. Commoners at the table for the first time. De Montfort did not live to see what he had started. He was killed in battle later that year, and his body was dismembered. His head was sent to a noblewoman as a gift. Parliament, from its very first days, was built on chaotic foundations. By 1341, under King Edward III, the two-chamber system had taken shape. The House of Lords, nobles and senior clergy, met separately from the House of Commons, the elected representatives of ordinary people. 2 rooms, 2 debates, 1 kingdom. The architecture has not fundamentally changed since.
So just to be clear, the basic structure of the most powerful legislature in the Western world was designed in 1341. For context, that's before the printing press, before the Black Death ended, before anyone in Europe had any idea the Americas existed. And they just kept it. Like, somebody looked at the blueprint from 1341 and said, yeah, this is fine. 2 rooms, people shouting at each other. We're good. We Americans spent 250 years arguing about how to update our own system. Britain said, 1341 design, we're done, moving on. We are going to come back to the shouting, because there are rules about the shouting.
Okay. January 4th, 1642. King Charles I enters the House of Commons. He does not knock. He does not ask permission. He walks into the chamber with an armed escort, sits in the speaker's chair, and demands that 5 MPs he has accused of treason be handed over to him immediately. The chamber is silent. He turns to the speaker, a man named William Lenthal, and asks him where the 5 members are. Speaker Lenthal stands and says this: "May it please your majesty, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak in this place, but as the house is pleased to direct me, whose servant I am here." The king looks around the chamber. The 5 MPs have already escaped through back doors. He leaves empty-handed. From that day forward, no reigning monarch has entered the House of Commons. Not because a law was written, not because a committee decided, because that one moment, a speaker choosing the House over the crown made the rule. And the rule stuck. On the night of October 16, 1834, the old palace of Westminster burned to the ground. The cause was mundane, an overloaded furnace burning old wooden tally sticks. But the result was spectacular. Crowds gathered on the Thames to watch. Artists painted it. Turner painted it twice. When Parliament was rebuilt, architects Charles Barry and Augustus Pugin designed something extraordinary. A purpose-built home for democracy, crafted around how Parliament actually worked. The facing benches, government opposite opposition, the distances, the layout, all of it designed not to impose a new order, but to house the existing one. They did not update the rules to fit the new building. They built the new building to fit the rules. That single decision tells you everything you need to know about what comes next. What follows is not a complete list of parliamentary rules. A complete list would take longer than Parliament has been running. What follows is a selection, chosen not for their importance, but for what they reveal about an institution that accumulated 8 centuries of custom without anyone ever stopping to ask whether all of it still made sense.
So, and I say this with complete love, only the British could make political insults more devastating by banning the direct ones. In Parliament, you cannot call a fellow member of Parliament a liar. You cannot call them a hypocrite. You cannot call them a coward, a drunk, a blackguard, a gutter snipe, an idiot, a pipsqueak, a squirt, a stool pigeon, a swine, a traitor, or a wart. A wart. These are people who absolutely torch each other in the press, on social media, in memoirs. They are not holding back anywhere else. But the moment they walk into that chamber, the person they are trying to politically annihilate becomes, and I am quoting directly from the rules, my right honorable friend. In America, a politician calls their opponent a disaster on live television and nobody blinks. In Britain, you call someone a pipsqueak in Parliament and the whole institution has to stop and deal with it. I genuinely cannot decide which system is more civilized. I'm going to need more time with this.
Those red lines on the floor, MPs cannot cross them during debate. They are 2 sword lengths apart. The reason they are 2 sword lengths apart is that when the benches were built, that was the minimum safe distance to prevent MPs from stabbing each other. Nobody has brought a sword to Parliament since 1313. There is an actual law from 1313 still active that bans it specifically. The lines are still there. America has the Second Amendment and an entire ongoing national conversation about weapons in public spaces. Britain solved it in 1313 with a floor marking and apparently never needed to revisit the issue. We're taking notes.
The standing and sitting that baffles every first-time viewer of Prime Minister's questions is not random. It is, in fact, the entire mechanism by which 650 elected representatives compete for the floor. There is no button to press, no digital cue, no microphone that turns on when your name is called. You stand. The speaker sees you or doesn't. If called, you speak. If not, you sit back down and try again. This practice, known as catching the speaker's eye, has been the sole method of floor management in the House of Commons for centuries. It has not been updated. There is no proposal to update it. The standing is the technology. The body is the interface.
And then there's applause. Applause is banned. Not discouraged, not frowned upon, banned. In 2015, 56 newly elected MPs spontaneously clapped for their leader, and the speaker stopped proceedings and told them off, on television, in front of everyone. Now, in America, applause is basically the punctuation of democracy. State of the Union, standing ovations every 45 seconds. We cannot get through a political speech without clapping. It's how we know something happened. In Parliament, instead of clapping, MPs cheer. They shout, "Hear, hear." They wave their order papers around like they're hailing a cab. Every form of noise is acceptable, except the specific one that involves putting your hands together. Clapping, specifically, is considered, and I want to be precise here, too American. That is not a compliment, and honestly, fair.
Every year, on the eve of the state opening of Parliament, the yeomen of the guard, the royal bodyguards, dressed in full Tudor uniform, carrying lanterns, descend into the cellars of the Palace of Westminster. They are searching for gunpowder. On November 5th, 1605, a man named Guy Fawkes was discovered in those same cellars with 36 barrels of gunpowder and a plan to blow up the House of Lords during the state opening, killing the king and most of the government in a single explosion. The plot was discovered hours before it was executed. That was 420 years ago. The search continues.
An elected member of Parliament held hostage at Buckingham Palace every year in a top hat. And the best part, the absolute best part, is that the reason this tradition exists is because Parliament killed a king. Parliament did the destabilizing thing they are now guarding against. They are protecting the monarchy from themselves. That's not a rule. That's a trauma response that got formalized into constitutional law, and then never removed. America declared independence from Britain in 1776, partly because we felt the British system of government was irrational and needed replacing. I want you to sit with that, and then look at the man in the top hat. We left, and they kept going, with the top hat, with the hostage, with all of it. 800 years. Maybe we were a little hasty.
Every year, while the monarch travels from Buckingham Palace to Parliament for the state opening, one member of Parliament travels in the opposite direction. From Parliament to Buckingham Palace, and stays there. They cannot leave. They are, in the formal constitutional language, a hostage. This tradition exists because of King Charles I, who was beheaded by Parliament in 1649 after a civil war between the Crown and the legislature. The hostage ensures that if anything were to happen to the monarch while they are at Parliament, historically not an unreasonable concern, Parliament would have something to answer for. The hostage is typically the vice chamberlain of the household, dressed in top hat and tails. In 2014, the MP serving in that role asked the head of the armed forces what would happen to him if something went wrong. The answer was, "We would have made it quick, Jim." The tradition continues.
420 years. Every year, lanterns, Tudor uniforms, full search of the cellars. Now, in America, after a security incident, we convene a committee. We issue a report. We upgrade the protocols. We install sensors. We move on. Britain said Tudor uniforms, lanterns, annual, forever. I want to make fun of this. I genuinely do. But 420 years of no further gunpowder incidents is a pretty strong argument for the Tudor uniform approach.
Once the monarch is seated in the House of Lords, they send an official called the gentleman or lady usher of the Black Rod to summon the members of Parliament to hear the King's speech. Black Rod walks the length of the building toward the Commons chamber. And the door is slammed in their face, deliberately, choreographed, every single year. Black Rod then knocks 3 times with their ebony staff. Only then are they admitted. Only then do the MPs follow them back to the Lords to hear the speech. The door is slammed because a king once walked through it uninvited. The knock is required because authority in this institution must ask permission before it enters. Everyone in the building knows this. Everyone participates anyway, because the alternative, admitting that the whole thing is theater, would miss the point entirely. The theater is not a performance of the principle. The theater is the principle, made physical, repeated annually so that no one in that building ever forgets what it cost to get here.
In America, if someone slammed a door in a government official's face, we would have a press conference about it within the hour. There would be a statement, a counter-statement, a news cycle. In Britain, it's Tuesday. It's procedure. Everyone knows the door is going to be slammed. Black Rod knows. The doorman knows. The king knows. And yet the door gets slammed every single year because the alternative, admitting the whole thing is theater, would miss the point entirely. The theater is the point. We love you, Britain. We genuinely do. But you are so weird. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the beautiful, baffling world of British tradition, you're exactly our kind of person. We're building a bit of a tradition of our own here at Night Shift Chronicles, researching the histories that most people have forgotten or just never knew existed. If you want to join us for the next investigation, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. It's much easier than dragging a speaker to a chair, and I promise, no top hats are required. Back to the chamber. Let's talk about the person who has to keep all this chaos in check.
Every institution needs someone to stand between power and the people it is supposed to serve. In the House of Commons, that person is the Speaker. The role has existed in some form since the 13th century. The name appeared in official records for the first time in 1377. And from almost the beginning, the job carried a specific and very serious occupational hazard. Between 1394 and 1535, a period of 141 years, 7 men who held or had previously held the position of Speaker were executed, beheaded. Because the Speaker's job was to carry the Commons' message to the King, and kings did not always receive bad news graciously. This is why, to this day, when a new Speaker is elected, they are physically dragged to the chair by other MPs. Not metaphorically, dragged. Because for the first 200 years of the modern speakership, accepting the role was genuinely dangerous and the reluctance was genuine. The costume is now ceremonial. The dragging is now ritual. But the memory is in the ritual, and the ritual keeps the memory alive.
7 speakers beheaded, and they still do the dragging thing every time. New speaker gets elected, other MPs grab them and physically haul them to the chair. Because 200 years ago, the people in that job were getting killed for it. That's not a weird tradition. That's institutional memory. That's the building remembering something the people in it can't afford to forget, which is kind of the whole thing with Parliament, when you think about it.
January 4th, 1642. We have been here before. King Charles I is standing in the chamber. His soldiers are at the door. He has asked Speaker Lenthal where the 5 MPs are. Lenthal stands. He does not look at the soldiers. He does not look at the door. He looks at the king and he says the words that would define the speakership for every generation that followed. May it please your majesty, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak in this place, but as the house is pleased to direct me, whose servant I am here. I am not the king's man. I am the house's man. The king left. The 5 MPs were never handed over. 7 years later, Charles I was tried by Parliament and executed, and no monarch has entered the Commons since. 1 sentence, 1 man, 1 moment of refusing to look away. The whole shape of British democracy pivoted on it.
You know what's wild to me? The speaker doesn't have a gavel. There's no button to cut someone's mic. There's no security that physically removes anyone immediately. The speaker just stands up, and everyone stops, because everyone in that room has internalized the same 800 years of accumulated habit. They know what the standing means. They know what happens if you ignore it. Not because of a law that was written last year, because of everything that happened before any of them were born. That's not weakness. That's actually kind of incredible.
The speaker today does not face execution. They face something arguably harder. 550 MPs who have all been elected, all believe they are right, and none of whom particularly want to be told to sit down. The speaker controls the floor without a gavel, without a microphone cut, without any technological enforcement whatsoever. They stand up, everyone sits down. That is the rule. That is the entire enforcement mechanism. The authority is real because everyone in the room agrees it is real. And they agree it is real because the alternative, a chamber with no one in the chair, is something the history of this building has already shown them at cost. Right now, in that chamber, 2 people stand at 2 dispatch boxes. On one side, a prime minister who was a prosecutor, a lawyer who spent his career holding the state to account for what it did to ordinary people. On the other, a leader of the opposition who was born in London to Nigerian parents, spent part of her childhood in Lagos fetching water from a well during power cuts, trained as a software engineer, became a lawyer, and is now the first black leader of any major British political party, standing at a box built from New Zealand wood, modeled on Australian replicas of Pugin originals destroyed by German bombs, containing a Bible that survived the Blitz. Neither of them wrote the rules they are following. Neither of them could unilaterally change them. Neither of them would be standing where they are standing if the barons had not forced a king into a field in 1215. If a rebel nobleman had not invited commoners to the table in 1265. If a speaker had not looked a king in the eye in 1642 and said, "I am the house's man."
Here's the thing that got me going through all of this. Every rule, every tradition, every moment where we Americans go, wait, why are they doing that? It has a reason. It just has a reason that's 400 years old instead of 4. The hostage in the top hat, the lanterns in the cellar, the door that gets slammed on purpose, the floor lines for swords nobody is carrying, the Bible burned by a bomb still sitting in a box. It all points back to the same question Parliament has been asking since 1215. Who has the power, and who watches the people who have it? We Americans like to think we invented democracy, and in a lot of ways we formalized it, exported it, wrote it down in documents that still matter. But this messy, strange, wart ban enforcing, hostage-taking, door-slamming institution, it was asking that question 500 years before we existed. And it's still asking it. Every Wednesday, at noon, loudly, in a room where you cannot call anyone a wart. We're obsessed. We're not sorry. And we'll see you next time.
This institution was not designed. It grew. Every strange rule, every medieval tradition, every piece of baffling theater exists because something happened, something real, something often violent, that made someone say, "We need a rule about that." The hostage exists because a king was killed. The gunpowder search exists because someone actually tried. The door gets slammed because a king walked through it uninvited. The speaker gets dragged because the job used to cost people their lives. The red lines exist because the room was once full of swords. The rules are not the residue of a dead past. The rules are the past, still present, still insisting on being remembered.